This is uh, from a it's from Pompeii. It was probably it survived Vesuvius, and it's a picture of Psyche, uh, the Greek goddess of the soul. It's where one of the first embodiments in some kind of myth of this thing we call soul. And we're reflecting on today's talk is entitled Reflections on the Soul. And we're going to talk about the soul in three different areas: personal, what it really means for a person to have a soul, what it means to have a community to have a soul, and what it means to have a nation when you talk about the soul of the nation. The word psyche in Greek soul, but it's also very close to words for breath and butterflies. So often uh, in Greek mythology, Psyche is pictured as a woman with wings, but also a butterfly symbol is a symbol, and both are symbols of some kind of transformation. And I'm spending the next few times talking about psychology and spirituality. And the very word psychology literally means the study of the soul. And it sort of disappeared from our parlance. We might talk about soul music, but the fact of the soul as a ancient and up to this moment important experience to talk about. And psychology is coming back around into it, but it's with Jung brought it back into parlance. Uh, and if you're a Jungian or you have a Jungian therapist, they have vocabulary for the soul. So we're going to try to work on our vocabulary for the soul today. Now, Rumi, who's one of my favorites, uh, uh, he had a theology of soul. And in one of the ends of one of his great poems, he says, "What is the soul? What is the soul?" He was still asking that question because it's a bit mysterious. And he said, "What is the soul? I'd trade my life for just one sip of an answer." Rumi said, "I'd trade my life for just one sip of an answer." Uh, so we'll follow that question. What is the soul? So I'm going to turn the screensaver off. There we go. We're going to first start talking about the soul in a human being, what that might mean. And I really want to start with a quote, a very insightful quote, covers a lot of territory here, and a lot of wisdom in this quote from a famous Kentuckian, Bell Hooks, uh, famous in the world as an intellectual and unbelievable writer. She was born not that far from here and came back to end her life back in Kentucky. She always felt like she was part of Kentucky. Well, here's her quote. Somebody you should, if you don't know Bell Hooks, a lot of the talks, hopefully we see sources of things that we can follow up on. Well, here's Bell on where she gives us some sense of soul here. She said, "When I speak of the spiritual, I refer to the recognition within everyone that there is a place of mystery in our lives where forces that are beyond the human desire or will alter circumstances and or guide and direct us. Some people call this presence soul or God, the beloved, higher consciousness, or the higher power." I really like that because she's talking about it's a place of mystery in our lives that has a kind of force that's beyond human desire or will that can alter circumstances and or guide and direct us. I think that's all really and she says people of all times have recognized this. Not everybody, of course, because it's very subtle. But and she says you could call this presence of mystery soul or God, the beloved, higher consciousness or the higher power, as the 12 steps do. Um, Now, I think it's your experience of soul, not what you call it, that matters. Because I mean, there's many other ways you could language this over time, how people have experienced um, this kind of presence of a kind of mystery, not only in us, but in our lives. It's what Merton experienced so spectacularly when he saw everyone shining like the sun on that Louisville street corner in 1958. Of course, he had practiced daily in the Trappist tradition for 17 years before, boom, he had this, and he also had the ability to write about it. Uh, but he saw everybody like glowing from the inside out, shining like the sun in the middle of the shopping district. Total surprise to Merton. And for me, I think for most of us, uh, that kind of experience uh, wells up slowly, as it did for Merton. I mean, he was banging away seriously with all kinds of spiritual practice every day for 17 years. And then boom. And he had the ability to communicate it, which not everybody does, because other people have this experience. Uh, um, and maybe they just don't know how to tell about it. He did. But I think there's a kind of trust that wells up uh, after years of daily practice, trust in what Merton's talking about, that we're all walking around shining like the sun. We all have something unique and mysterious and wise and that can guide us. But it's sort of not obvious. And but it does sort of trust in that, and you start to guide by it. It sort of wells up uh, after daily practice, years of it. And it's sort of like the way groundwater will well up into a natural spring, or actually, it's what we tap into when we sink a well. And a spring isn't a thing. And neither is our soul. And I think most importantly, from our point of view here as people in a spiritual community, and this is true of just physical wells that everybody has. If you think of the old form of the well, with coming up out of the ground with a bucket, and one thing we've learned is when you don't draw water from the well, it dries up. So a lot of people, and drawing water from the well is uh, actually sinking that bucket down every day and bringing it up, and it's a good image for having a daily spiritual practice. Uh, and Again, I send out the notes. If you're new, I send out the notes. If I don't have you on my list to receive the notes, uh, uh, details on this are all there if you missed something. But and I these are 6 ways I draw water from my well every day. Reading that feeds my soul. I usually start out reading something that's feeding my soul, and I'm going to mention 3 books today that if you want to if you want to actually understand soul and feed it at the same time, these 3 books will be very uh, helpful. The first book would be a classic. It's called The Care of the Soul by Thomas More. And again, I've got this in the notes, and if you don't have a pen to write it down. The Care of the Soul by Thomas More. It's classic, and that would feed your soul. I usually follow it with some sitting meditation, formal sitting meditation. After that, I write, uh, or journaling, just bringing forth what's within is what I do. Uh, and then if I can, today I didn't get out because it was raining, but I take a walk along my Camino, which I've been walking on now for over 40 years, my little road that goes out of my house and up to Barnes Road, etc. So reading, sitting, writing, walking, Any way you get out in nature is good. Mindfulness, which is on the fly, moment by moment, um, doing what you're doing when you're doing it, which is the opposite of multitasking, which gets us something we sort of promote in our culture. We sort of believe we can't get through the day without doing several things at one time, having several balls in the air. But mindfulness is really unitasking. Uh, as one old nun told me, it used to be written in Latin over the entrance to her novitiate. In Latin, basically. And she rattled off the Latin. I said, "Well, what did that mean?" And she said, "Do what you're doing when you're doing it." And don't be doing something else. Don't be washing the dishes and thinking of something else, for instance. Yeah, so mindfulness is sort of, I'm giving this talk. That's it. You know, so if something comes on my phone, I'm not going to look at it. You know, and then the last thing of the six things that are really what my spiritual practice look like is what I could, Buddhist sense, the Buddhist word, loving kindness, uh, just service. The basic service to the planet right now is to be kind. There's a lack of kindness all over the place, and so just to have the loving kindness and give a talk like this, service to the community, a little inspiration. By the way, I'm sending out uh, the talks that are open in October, November, and December until the new year, and that could be filled by other members of the community besides me. And that's something that we're really trying to promote in here. And I have about 12 people that have sort of, signed up for that kind of thing. Some have done one, and some have done multiple talks. It's a great gift to the community. That's a spiritual practice, to just be of service to people. If, uh, today we're going to uh, um, do a Tibetan form of intercessory prayer for Julie. Well, that's a spiritual practice, and that's service. And that's what it means to be in community. Yeah, so that's what I do on a regular basis. And again, Care of the Soul by Thomas More, really good if you want to explore this a little bit more. Okay, so you can say much more about the what the soul means to human in a human life, in an individual human life. Uh, Socrates, one of the greats, uh, he had a whole one of his dialogues, the Phaedrus, on that, and he basically said it's what makes a human being alive. It's um, it's the vitality that we have, and somehow when this body and mind and the heart and the soul have had their time on this planet, uh, the soul goes elsewhere. It moves on. That's an ancient belief, not so current, but anyway, it's out there and it's been around for a long time. Uh, Much more to say on that, but I'm really trying to keep this within 30 minutes so that we can have time to do parts two and part three. Now, about soul in the community, this community, for instance, the Heart to Heart community, uh, every Monday when I put out my poem of the week, I'll have a little part about the Heart to Heart community there and list our retreats. But uh, it has a little description in very few words. We are a 21st century interspiritual community. This community was born in the 21st century with COVID in March of 2020, but we're up to date in the sense of we want to include everything that's at our disposal in terms of the spiritual path. And it's interspiritual, meaning that amongst our community of people here, there may be very different spiritual traditions you're drawing on. And it's inspired by contemplation and action. Okay. And right now, as a listener, uh, you're contemplating my words all week. I was writing and contemplating what I was going to say, and then action, finally doing it. Okay, I'm giving the talk. And also all kinds of actions, like I said, where this group donates to people who are actually on the front lines of trying to do things to save people's lives or save save a country's democracy. So contemplation and action are key. They're like the two hands of it. They're not opposites. They come together. And finally, inspired by contemplation and action, our community trusts in the healing energy of love. And that's exactly what we'll be doing with Tonglen. Uh, at the end, when we send the healing energy of love to Julie, even though, well, she's about 200 miles from me in Nashville, and farther if you're Vivienne, in France. So our paths are many in this community. Uh, some people have a Buddhist practice. Some people are just finding a practice. Some people have, I mean, I have a primarily Buddhist, a Christian practice, and a poetry practice. There's a lot of different practice. Uh, Yet we're one community. So how do you do that? Well, that's a trick. I mean, we're not like there's not an orthodoxy here. Uh, and the trust is important. And the trust is we trust in no matter what our path is, what our unique form is. Um, Somehow we're trusting in the healing energy of love, just the love of being here, just your presence. Your presence for me uh, is healing for me. Now, this is something tricky for me, particularly as a founding teacher. Gave most of the talks in the first 3 years of the 6 years we've been around. It's a continued challenge for me to talk about my authentic path, which is the only thing anybody can talk about. But it's a challenge for me because I'm kind of a founding teacher here to talk about my authentic path without implying that it would be the correct or right path for anyone else. And so I want to say that out front, and I don't say it enough that all I can talk about is what I know, my experience in my 60 years really of doing this kind of work. And something very helpful happened in 1986, and I may have told you about this, but if you haven't heard about this, the Dalai Lama came to Gethsemane here, just 30 minutes down the road, to do a first of a couple Gethsemane encounters between Buddhists and Christians, and in honor of Merton, because when the Dalai Lama met Merton, uh, he had met a Christian. He's met the first Christian that he thought he could have a dialogue with. And anyway, at one point, the Dalai Lama's, because they had different Buddhists there, Zen guys and whatever, and even amongst Buddhism, there's different among Tibetan Buddhism. There's four different lineages. So the Dalai Lama at one point he said, I'm not here to tell you that my type of Tibetan Buddhism is the best. It's my path. It's the best for me. But the human beings are too diverse to have just one way. And he said it, and then he was looking for the metaphor, and he said it's like Baskin Robbins. I found out after that he really always tries to get ice cream somewhere. He says like Baskin Robbins. He says there's 31 flavors. He said, but just make sure you get ice cream. In other words, a genuine path. Yeah, and so he was saying the same thing I am. I can only talk about what I know and what my experience is, but doesn't mean it has to be yours. And you need to find a path that resonates with your heart and soul and then walk it. In other words, stick with it. If you find something that really resonates with it, go with it. Go with it and practice it every day if you can. Yeah. And our community is here to celebrate and support you on your unique journey. That's important to understand with this community. So that's sort of the soul of this community anyway. And then in the end, it boils down to trusting in the healing energy of love. So I've got a few more minutes. I want to talk about the soul as it's applied to a nation. And there's a couple more books here that I'll list here that I think would be really helpful in this area. John Meacham, who's a great presidential historian, wrote a book called The Soul of America at the beginning of I think Trump's first term, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. It's great. To a soul on how the soul of a nation could be talked about. And then there's a second one I'm reading right now is Eddie Glaude's uh, Princeton teacher, or Rutgers, I guess he's at Rutgers, and it's called America, comma USA. And I want to talk a little bit about Eddie's book at the end here, but John Meacham and Eddie Glaude's America, comma USA, and he subtitles his book "How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries." He put it out here for the 250th anniversary, and the title America, comma USA. He's trying to bring to the fore sort of what he considers, and the term is from I think W.E.B. Du Bois. There's a kind of double consciousness in this country. There's which could be a deep contradiction in our nation, a double consciousness where America stands for the grand of visions of freedom in those documents, uh, in the Constitution and the uh, in just the primary documents, Declaration of Independence. So America associates with that, and then USA, according to Eddie, represents the gritty, often ugly political reality shaped by, especially from his point of view, racism. Uh, and I think he's on to something. Eliot was talking about this in his four quartets, where he said between the idea of America and the reality, between the idea and the reality falls the shadow. And so, you know, as a member of this interspiritual community, a community like this, the question I have to ask myself, this is what I'm asking myself, is how do I respond to this nation's shadow, not only of racism, but there's a shadow of materialism and a shadow of militarism. Martin Luther King, in his epic talk a year to the day before he was assassinated, he talked about the triple evils of our country: racism, materialism, and militarism. And all are on display right now. The shadows are there. And so how do you respond to that? I think it's an important question, and both Eddie and John Meacham brings it up right at the beginning of the Soul of America. I mean, they're just picking up people off the streets just because they're brown now, and then who knows what happens to them. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. How do you respond to that? And everybody is going to find their own unique response via contemplation and what actions to take. Every day, I'm trying to live my response to those three things that's the USA part, the often gritty, ugly political reality: racism, materialism, and militarism, the triple evils, Martin Luther King. I think they're very real, and we have to talk about them. We have to consider them. We have to live with them. And I think, at least that's my response to it. So every day I live my response, and every day I sit with all these things. And one day, while I was preparing this, something made it onto the page that was very true for me, for my heart and soul right now. And it became a poem that I'll put out tomorrow, but you get advanced the advanced release here. It's called The Soul of America. And no, Meacham's book's about 250 pages, same name. This is like 87 words. That's what poets do. And so I'm just going to end with this, and then it will be in the notes, and it'll be in the Monday morning poem of the week. The Soul of America. For Jimmy Baldwin, for Eddie Glaude, and all souls on fire. One student in the James Baldwin course, one student in the James Baldwin course that Eddie Glaude teaches at Rutgers, summed up what she learned in the entire course from Baldwin and Glaude in these few words. Eddie Glaude talks about this in his book. She was been spending the whole semester reading uh, the works of James Baldwin and then discussing them with Eddie, and she just came in sort of tears. And she was supposed to have a final paper, and she ended up with having something like 20 words or less. And she told Eddie, she said, "What remains is not hope, but something just as strong. The insistence of truth, carried by love, lit by rage. What remains is not hope," because she's read all of Baldwin. She's a black female, young girl, and she now sees the whole history of 400 years of what those folks have been through, and says, "What remains is not hope, but something just as strong. The insistence of truth, carried by love, lit by rage." I got an email just yesterday from somebody I've known for years, and I guess she opens my Saturday thing, Saturday postcards uh, on Gaza. I've sent over 130 of them since I started doing this, just saying what's going on in Gaza. And she says, "How do you do it?" She says, "How don't?" She says, "I'm just feel like I'm on the edge. I just think this is so awful." She says, "The rage is so strong. What do you do with it?" And which was a good question. And I said, "Well, check out tomorrow's poem on Monday." I said, it's my best shot at what I do with it. Part of what I do with it is I'm a witness, and that's what we're talking about. As you become more and more in awareness, you're aware of what's going on, and rather than looking the other way, which we're trained to do. So, uh, you know, what remains is not hope, but something just as strong, the insistence of truth carried by love, lit by rage. And all I can say in solidarity with this young student is this: "Oh, love that fires the sun, keep my soul burning for truth, justice, and the flourishing of all." Yeah, that's my response at this time. The way I could work it out on the page. "Oh, love that fires the sun, keep my soul burning for truth, justice, and the flourishing of all." And by all, I mean all, all Americans, all human beings on this planet. Uh, and no, no, you know, nobody's ruled out. Everybody's included. And if your soul's burning for truth and justice and that and for everybody getting a chance to flourish, at least I am anyway. So I think that's good enough for now, Joe. Thanks for listening.